So I put a couple of samples down here at the bottom of this. So here I have some ideas, and so I'm going to actually take some of this, and I'm going to say, all right, let's do some of these things. So I'm going to create these two items. I'm going to take out some of the, should be string. So here we actually have created the arrays that I was talking about. So I did it in one step. I said, hey, I'm going to identify a string. I'm going to call it school. I know that there's 3 items in there, and I'm going to say School of Arts and Science, School of Professional Studies, and School of Education. All those items then are loaded into that variable school. Tuition is I did the same way. I said I'm going to create one that's 3. I'm going to have whatever these prices are, and again, those aren't probably the right ones. I was just showing that as an example. And so now this program's got 2 variables in it that are arrays, and we can use those to try to identify what we have going on. You're going to enter in a name or a number or some other way to identify which school you're associated with, and it's going to output some tuition and what you actually owe. So if I go a little bit further down this rabbit hole, so here's our 3 pieces, and this looks a lot like what we're going to do. One of the things I am going to do, though, is I'm going to clean this up just a little bit. Clean up, drag it over here, and notice I'm printing it as big as I can so you guys can see it. I am going to come up here, and I'm going to create another variable called a numeric, and I'm going to call this one number of schools. Again, we want to use that, and I'm going to set that equal to 3. Well, I'm going to use this in place of a number. That number, it tells me it's at 3. Well, now we're putting it in programmatically so that now we can modify this. So if I really want to change how many schools we have, I can change one value up here, and it changes that from 3 schools to 5 or 7, and then I could certainly add in the other schools as we progress. So this creates that array. I almost always want to, when I use arrays and other things, I want to do this using variables. Because here, all I have to do is I make one change, and I go 5, and now we have the ability to have 5 schools. We're going to, that when that program runs, it creates a set of 5 buckets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can use that. So, yes? Right? Because I have 2 arrays. We put in the 2 arrays, and so that's how I've done them. They're parallel arrays. So if it's in position 0 or 1, then it's in the same position in the second one, just like we did with those where we had a list of menu items and their prices. So once I figure out what school you are, and I know what position it is, so you're in position 1 or 2 or 7 or however many we have, then I'm going to use that same knowledge to get it back out of a second parallel array. So you could even do a 3rd piece or 4th and all have them parallel. If you wanted to know what the dean of each one of those schools is, we could actually even do something very similar, and you could return that information. So I gave you some other pieces in here, and I said, all right, well, here is a way that I can get some information from you. So I'm going to copy and paste that in there. I don't want to spend the entire hour on this. I want to get some other things done. So, output, please enter your school number, input, choice. So actually up here at the top, I really need to define choice. Chose string, choice, and I'm going to set it equal to a blank to begin with. So please enter your school number, and I'm going to input choice. Now, the next step I have is I really want to validate that to make sure that it fits where I'm going to have. So while choice is less than 1, so if you entered a negative number or a 0, it's going to run this next piece, or it's greater than 3. But what I really want to put in there is not 3, but my variable up there, number of schools. So now if I expanded that to 5, I don't break other things in here, so I'm always using that value here. This 1 I can leave in there. That 1 is a fairly standard way we know that if it's below that array, and you'll see when we get into Python, I can actually address Python and most languages with a negative number. And it works a little differently, but now you're going to input that choice. Now, notice I've done one strange thing in here. I have also said choice is equal to a string, right? So in a little bit in Python, we're going to look at what we call casting in, but I did that as a string for a reason to avoid an error. If I did that as just a numeric and you put in the value of ABC, it's going to crash and say there's an error with your program because it's trying to compare a number to a string. So for right now, I'm just going to use this line. I'm just going to say convert to numeric. We don't know how to do it yet, but we're going to put that in there just so you see that. And I'm going to say convert to numeric. So now they've entered in a value and said, hey, my school is whatever we happen to do. So we need to display what those schools are. So we need some instructions for them. So over here, I thought I had actually put that in there as an instructions. So here, I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to rewrite it all. I'm going to make my first module. And notice here I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to put my start in. And I'm going to put a stop down here. Just to tell me that that's my mainline program. My first module, I'm going to call it a void. Just because it's not going to really do anything. And I'm going to call that instruction. I'm not bringing anything into it. I'm not taking anything out. And my next line, I'm going to set up a series of print statements or output statements if we're doing pseudocode. So this way people know what we're trying to output and what we need to input. And I'm just putting quote marks on them. So output. And then at the very bottom of this, I'm going to put a return. And I'm not returning anything in terms of numbers, values, or anything else. That just marks the end of my first one. So this is actually my first function. So to call that function, well, please enter your school number. So before this, I'm going to have a call to that function. And because I'm not sending anything into it or pulling data back, I can just do it this way. So now I've called that function. It's going to load those variables up and it's going to output this information. Please enter those. I could even change this line, and it probably makes some sense to do that. And I'm going to take that and actually put it down here. So now it's going to print all those items and then says, input your choice. Number Eric. All right. So I'm going to use that instructions. While choice is 1 or, so we know that it's also going to continue to run if it doesn't meet the right requirements. I'm going to put the same thing and I'm going to post instructions so they see the instructions again. That's part of that value is once I have that instructions created, I can call it 100 times and it doesn't make any difference where that actually happens at. So that's a function right there. So I've made a routine here and I fire it off by just calling instructions. So now my main line really just says, oh, I'm going to run instructions. I'm going to input choice, while choice. So here's what my next function is going to be. I'm going to take this and actually turn all of this into a function. So on which one are you looking at? Well, I really should have everything indented, but just to kind of save some screen space, I haven't. So everything inside the start and stop should be indented. But right now they're all at the same indent line. So all my numeric, where we do the declarations, are all there. So now I want to make function 2, and I want to get their choice, and I want to call this function get choice. And so I'm going to come down to the bottom, and I'm going to write one. And because I'm going to return a numeric, I'm going to call it get choice. And I'm going to take all of this, so running the instructions, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm actually going to put it down, tab it in, and I need to tab in some of these, so hang on a second, so we can see that they're under. Well, ends up there. And so now, in this case, I probably do need to return something. So notice here, I've put all of these instructions in here. So my program now has a bunch of declarations, and it's going to run a function called get choice. I need it set up to user choice equals. So whatever this get choice function finds, I'm going to return that value of choice. So choice comes out of this function and comes back up here and gets assigned into user choice. So now I've made 2 functions. And notice what I've done very cleverly is my first function, those instructions, run out of the other function. So my mainline code, the only thing that's actually doing anything right now is this line. Everything else is just declaring variables. So now I could create a third function, and I could call that output. So we know that we need to output, and so sometimes it's easy to do this. We need to output some information. And because we're going to output some pieces of that, I may want to call that my output function. So I've called it output function. Now I can start looking at what I'm going to do. So the first thing I know I'm going to pass in is user choice gets passed in. If we had other information that we got in their name and date of birth and all those kinds of things, I could also pass that in. So now I need to build the module user choice, or what do we call it? Output function. So here we're going to have, and I know I'm going to output some strings, so I'm just going to call it a string output function. And I know I'm going to get into it a variable. And what I want to make sure you realize is it doesn't have to be the same name. And I'm passing into it user choice. So I could call this anything inside of here, and I'm just going to call it choice again. So I get this number choice that comes back in. And so now I could output, and because they're user choice, your school is, and then I could output whatever my variable is. So right up here I have called it school. And I'm hitting it with that array number. Yep, choice, because that's what I'm bringing into this. That's the variable I'm bringing into this. It doesn't have to be the same thing, but it's going to be a number between 1 and 3. And then I could output your price is, and then that's tuition. And then I don't need to return anything, so I'm just ending that one. And so now my mainline code, this is where this is an advantage. My mainline code is really this. I'm going to call the function user choice, which gets a value, calls another function, and my output function. So all I'm really doing is saying I'm getting a choice from a user, and now I'm outputting. So I don't have to, all those details go into those functions. So my brain can work a little easier because I know I've got to just do something to get their input, and now I've got to do an output. And I can work those independently. So I could send part of that off to somebody else to code and say, hey, I need a module to do the output. Send that over to me. So that's what this would look like with 3 functions. It doesn't have to be that way, or 3 modules. There are a million different ways you could have set that up. You could have set that up in millions of different ways. This is just one quick, off-the-cuff, how do we start doing that? So I think hopefully anyway, it'll be easier once we actually start seeing that in Python. And so that's where we're headed to today, is we're on our buddy Python. So I've had some weird questions coming about Python and how to make it run and how to function. So I'm going to really quickly go through how to install Python one more time. I know I have some standalone stuff, but if I go to python.org, which is our friend and contributor in here, I'm going to go to the download area. And it'll automatically usually pick up the right operating system. So I installed this on my Mac yesterday in my office, and it pulls up, hey, you want the Mac version. So I'm going to download this file. Luckily, I've already got it downloaded, and I'm going to find that file in my downloads folder. Come along. And it's going to take it a second to download. I thought I had it, but we cleaned out our downloads folder again. Come on, slow internet. Come on, slow internet. I've never seen it take that long to download. Yeah. I noticed some odd things on our download and network speeds here yesterday, so I'm suspicious. 30 seconds. I have 30 seconds of patience. Do I have 10 seconds of patience? Holy cow. And normally this should download in a few seconds, and so for whatever reason it's taking a bit. Yay. All right. So I've downloaded this file called Python, and it's an executable on a Windows folder. So I'm going to run it. When I run this, so apparently they've updated from 3.8.1 to 3.8.2 from just the other day. I get the choice to upgrade. So I'm going to upgrade this version. See what wonderful things we can break. I only need this file once. So once I'm done installing, I can delete this file off my computer. The Mac version actually does it really nicely and says, hey, do you want to delete the installation file? Windows is not always so nice, and it doesn't give me that option. And again, patience in here is not always my strong suit. This computer is sadly a little slower than I'm used to. It's not as bad as some of them I've seen on campus. But on my desktop at home, this literally took about 2 seconds to install. So. Painful. Watching paint dry. All right, so it says it set it up. If this is the first time you're installing, you're going to go through all of the defaults. You don't need to make any changes necessarily on it. So now, I don't ever need this file again. Unless I need to reinstall it, in which case I'll re-download it because I'll get a newer version. So I'm going to just delete this one out of my downloads folder. Now it's gone. The way I start Python, at least what we're going to use for now, is I'm going to, on the Windows version, I'm going to call up something called IDLE. So if, and it's hard to see because I don't have this one as my first screen, if I click on the Start menu and I go down to Python, it also shows up as, I probably have 30,000 versions of it at this point. That is this Python idle right here. I tend to just hit the Windows key and start typing Python. It's fairly easy to find. If you're in the Mac, you have to go to the Finder in the Applications folder, and unless you've saved a shortcut or something odd. This is Python. This is what we're going to use right here. Doesn't look very exciting, except this is what we're going to call the interactive mode, and we're going to show you here in a second what we call the scripting, or how we're going to build our code mode. So this one allows us to run a single line of code. We can actually run some multi-lines too, but for the most part, we're limited to a single line of code. So the most common thing I'm going to look at is print. Here's one of the downsides to this language. It's very forgiving of a lot of things, but capital letters, so capital print is different than lowercase print. And usually if it's going to do something, notice it'll change colors. And so in this case, it changed to this pinkish, orangish, whatever color it is, purplish. Here's where my color blindness kicks in. It's a different color, I can see that. But I'm going to print. Print is a function. Everything we do is almost always a function. There's a lot of embedded functions in Python. Print is one of them that's embedded. And I know that seems weird when you first think about it, that you're printing, but think about you're printing to the screen. So you don't care where it goes, whether it goes to the printer or to an output device of some kind. Print just means you're getting it out of the program. So I'm going to type print, and I'm going to type a welcome to CMIS 210. And I encourage you to follow along in here and try these things. Because if you don't, you're going to get lost later on and go, what? How did you make that happen? When I say print, it echoes it back out to the screen then in some color of text. Blue? Okay. I thought that's what it was. It's hard for me to see from here to there. It's a long ways anyway. So it echoes that out to the screen and says, my line of code worked. If I did the same thing, but I had something I forgot. So if I forgot, for example, the end parenthesis, I'm going to get an error. In this case, I just doubled it up to see what would happen. I get an error. And it really tells me that, for the most part, the errors I'm going to get are syntax errors. That means there is something wrong with my structure of that command. It doesn't really do a good job of telling me if there's a logical error, because that's our brains that have to construct the logic piece. The computer, though, reads that code, and it parses through it, and it looks and says, all right, oh, I see a print command. I see the, all right, so you must want to print the value, welcome to CMIS 310. So those kinds of errors, so welcome to CMIS 210, and I can put multiple items in there. And if I had variables set up, I could print out a variable. Now, what's going to happen here? Do we have a value for x? And it's going to give us another error. And it's going to say, oh, wait a minute. X isn't defined. So because we didn't predefine that x and have some way to do it, it's not going to print out a value for me. So that's really the two basic errors you're going to see. Is it's going to give you this one that starts where a trace back and kind of shows you where it's at. And then we have a syntax error. We are going to see a lot of those before you're done with this class. That doesn't mean to throw up your hands and panic. Use them as a teaching guide and go, aha, let me see what else I can do. When I get stuck, well, that's when we run into some issues. And in fact, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to build a resource library where you can go out and find information, where you can find some tools, and you can start working with this. So the other piece of this idle environment is where we're going to live most of the time. That environment is what we call the script mode. And that, the easiest way to start it, I click on File, I click on New. It looks a little different. So I don't have this piece up top, and notice my top pieces are a little different. File, Edit, Format, Run, Options. Oh. So now I'm in what they call a script mode. This, I'm writing something. It doesn't execute when I hit Enter at the end of the line. I'm writing an entire batch of commands. So if I did the same thing and I said print, and notice it changes color again, and I put in welcome to the machine. Now I'm going to run this line and it's going to print. But I have one more little obstacle. When I click run, and I'm going to run my module, or F5, it says, aha, you have to save it. So this has to have a saved file somewhere to run. Well, this is where I'm going to say you should probably create a folder, or even on a flash drive, somewhere for all your CMIS 210 stuff to land. So I did that actually on this computer, and I put one in that said Spring 2020. Now all my programs can live here, and all my coding can live in this folder. So I'm going to call this one second program. And one of the things that I would like you to do is practice the idea of not putting spaces in file names. It's going to create problems when we try to link to other files, and it's just really a bad process, because when the computer reads that name, it just stops at that blank and says, oh, I must be done reading that name. And in a lot of cases, we're not. So now that I saved it, now it actually runs. And notice it jumps back to the interactive mode to run and says, oh, here I ran this program, which is located at C users, CMIS lab, blah, 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 blah. And here's my actual program name. They end in .py. So that tells me that it's a Python file. It's really nothing more than a text file. And I can find it Let me find my Explorer. So if I go in and I find that area, Documents, CMIS 210, which is string, and I look at that, it's got a little different symbol, but I can actually open it with idle, and that's one way I get into them pretty quickly. I right-click and edit it. But I can also open it if I really wanted to with Notepad. And in Notepad, which is what we've been using, it's the same thing. The disadvantage to Notepad, it doesn't give me those color codings to let me know what's going on. But I can certainly write it in Notepad if I wanted to. Later on, much later, we'll show you some other tools that might make life easier. Because there are some things that are frustrating with my Python. So let me show you. I'm going to open up this one again. Edit with idle. I'm just going to grab the first one that's available. So in this case, I have multiple lines, but does it tell me anywhere what my line number is? So those errors are going to say, here you need line 37. This doesn't block out line numbers, which is one of my frustrations with it. So this is also an example of a program in Python, except it does one more additional thing. And so we talked about it briefly. If I try to run this program, so if I try to run my second one, I just double click, it's going to run. But you can't see anything that's happening. It's just a flash on your screen. Because it opens, it prints it on its little screen, and it closes because there's nothing to hold it open. This version, I have this input here that says, hey, press any key. So it pauses and waits for me to press a key, and so you'll see the difference. So now, this one said Hello World version 2020. When I just run it directly, notice it's in that weird black screen instead of the white screen on the idle editor. But it stays open because we have this blank input here. As soon as I press any key, it disappears. And so that's what's happening, or why we use that to hold that open. All right. In our Blackboard shell, you will see for week 7, we talk about making sure you get it installed. And then there is a discussion board question for week 7. You also have to respond to 2 fellow students. So even from the time I wrote this again at the end of at the beginning of the school year, this has now changed. I need to go in and edit my site. Is it 3.7 anymore? 3.8. So I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to say it's really now 3.8. Our textbook talks about version 3.2 or 3.3, and I will say that I'm using an older textbook just because it's cheap. There's a lot of Python stuff out there. Why would we use the latest version of this software? Why wouldn't we stick and download? Because I can go in and I can download 3.2. If I go back to Python, I can actually get older versions. I can make you go back and say, I want to find full list of downloads, and I want to go back to 3.2. I can scroll down and find it. So here's 3.2, released in 2011. I could go grab that one. But why would I want you to use the latest and greatest version? Because I want to torture you? Melissa's over there like, yes, kind of. So think about why I would want to use the latest version. What is the advantage of that? So you do need to respond to 2 fellow students. We'll probably have some time in here, so those of you that are in class can work on that one in here today. So let's look at the rest of our assignment for this week. So this week, we need you to read, find my book, chapter 1, 14 whole pages. But more than that, you have to work along in this book, and you have to get your hands dirty in working with this. If I don't, you're not going to learn how to do anything in here. And Python is kind of like crack. It's the gateway drug to other things. It's how we introduce you to some of these other concepts, some of the other pieces we're going to do. So the first chapter is really only 14 pages long. There are some important pieces. Page 14 has a last line of the program. And that last line of our program, to hold that open, they do a couple of additional pieces. So if I can find my idle environment. So they do something slightly, oops, wrong one. Grab the other one. Nope, somewhere in this list. Well, let me grab it again here. So I used a So notice I used an input and they use an input. But they use a couple of other pieces in there also. They made it very pretty and fancy. And they said, press the enter key to exit. But at the very beginning of their code, they did something else. They had a /n/n. What does the /n do? So maybe we need to experiment and see what that /n might do. So if I print hello world, and then I print another statement, so print So if you haven't noticed, we've got hundreds of small children running around our campus for Dr. Seuss. So I'm going to print 2 lines, and I want to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to run this. And it will actually say, hey, do you want to save this file? Because I made a change, so it's going to save it for me. And it says, all right, hello world, welcome to Peru, Dr. Seuss. And then I have my press any key. And my press any key looks kind of ugly. So what I would like to do is move that press any key down about 3 lines so that it's not right on top of my program. And I might even want to put a line between these 2. So that oddly named, so I'm going to change mine just a little bit. I'm going to type it very similar to what they have there. So /n/n, and I'm going to actually go 4 of them. And then I'm going to make that a capital so it looks really nice. So I have very similar to press the enter key to exit. I'm going to say press any key. Very, very similar. So now I'm going to save that and see what happens. Write the wrong one. No. Notice what it actually did. It moved it down 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. So that /n, even though it's embedded in a print statement and inside the quote marks, the program reads that and says, hey, you want to start a new line. And so we can experiment with that a little bit. So this moved that down and made it look a little better. Notice it did take this space here, so I probably want to eliminate that. So it even lets me put it up next to each other. And it says, all right, now that looks a little better. It looks a little neater. Well, I want to do the same thing and start a new line here. So I can just copy that and go in. But notice what I did. Did it turn it green? No. I need it inside the quote mark. And now, when I run this, make it a little smaller so you can see all the way down to the bottom. It put a space in, said hello world, welcome to Peru, and then said press any key. And so there are some other ones that work very similar to that. So if I took out one of the n's and I put a T in, let's see what happens. And the only way we learn in here is we try things. So let me scroll that up. So what do you think the T stands for? Tab. So the tab and the new line are one of the ways we move text around on our screen. So we can move them around and we can try to get things. So Chapter 1 really says, hey, this is how we're going to start a game. We're going to start writing things. So blank lines. The other one I want to go over again and make sure everybody has is the idea of comments. So comments are, there we go. All right, so comments are really a handy thing to put in here. So one of the things I'm going to put in at the top of my program is I'm always going to have a comment line that says who I am. That way when I turn in code, I know, hey, it's actually me. I may put in some other things about it. I may put in, this is assignment 37B for week 15. And so when I do that, when I put in this comments, let's see what happens when I actually run it. They don't print out, but they're really handy for us later on to see where they're at. So that comment tag, and I can even tuck one at the end of a line. So not super exciting, but it comes in and says, all right, we're those comment tags are how you're going to keep your sanity in this class. If you've already lost it, you'll never need to use them again. But it really does. A, it lets me know who you are, and I can put down anything down in the comments. So you could put in, I know I watched the lecture, but I still can't get the print to work. So you could even leave a note in there to me going, hey, I think I have this down, it doesn't work. Now, better if you ask ahead of time and said, I would like to figure out how to do this, but at least I would know what you're trying to do, rather than looking at some mystery code and saying, oh my goodness, what is that? I usually also put in things, so I break up my code a little bit, and that's why I would say, below are declarations. And then when I get to the mainline code, main line code below. These are really a handy tool. You can break up your items a lot of different ways. So before we get too far, I also want to look at a couple of variables. Variables are easy in Python. We used X, and we used X in there, and I'm going to declare X right now. So Python is super easy. Everything else we had to say, well, it was a numeric. I can just say X equals 56. I'm going to then add it into one of my print statements here. Now, capital X and lowercase x are two different things. And it's smart enough, it says, oh yeah, it's 56. It even makes, notice it gives me a space here. When I put that comma in and I set up two different items in there, it's even smart enough to make an actual space in there for me. Python holds our hand. I don't even have to declare it as a variable. And I can prove that, so I could say y equals so now I could put another print statement in. And again, I have to pass it in. And so now, if I run this, it passed that variable out. So Python makes our life really easy or really hard, depending on the way you want to think about it. Sometimes it's easier to explicitly declare that. Where we get into trouble is when we don't know if it's a variable, if it's a string, or a numeric. And we try to do something with it thinking it's a string, and it's really a number, or vice versa. So Python's really easy. To declare a variable, that's all we have to do is say, that's what it's equal to. So the equals sign is what we call an assignment operator. So Python also does something really nice for us, and you'll see ahead. When we compare, it actually uses a double equals. No, it actually will tell you automatically, and it'll say, all right, I know that you put in a text value, and here it is. So again, that's good and bad. If I'm writing something really short like this, it's pretty handy. But when I'm getting more complex, where I'm doing some manipulations, it can be a little bit of a problem because I have to figure out, well, what kind of variable is it in reality. So once I declare it, though, so when I run this first line, the first time I used it, it's now set as a numeric. So if later on, here I can show you, I wanted another line in my program, and now I'm going to change x. So I want to assign x something different. So I could say x equals So now let's see what happens when we run that. And it may yell at me. But what it really did, it actually ran. But notice what happened to my line of code down below. So even though we said, hey, do this, it oftentimes screws things up in weird ways that we can't predict. So in this case, it didn't yell at me. The older versions of Python, it would, so that must be something. They're allowing it to recast on the fly, which they didn't used to let you do. So once we reassign it, apparently it's bright enough to figure that out. Now, if I tried to add them together or do something else, that's when it would probably do something weird. So I try to put in as much detail up here as I can. The other thing is it makes it nice because I can always assign that garbage collection in there. But I will rarely use X and Y, because what I would really like is this is a variable. So those self-documenting, the more things I make self-documenting, if I just had X's and Y's running intermittently through my program, it's really hard to tell what's going on. So I need to be able to flip back and forth from interactive to script mode. I am not going to save my changes. So this is, if it's got this debug and everything else, that's that interactive mode. And I start out always by saying IDLE or finding it in another manner, so either on the menu. And that's where we're going to start our programming from is on Python. So we're going to start here. You always go File, New, and then you can start with a blank one. What I also would encourage you to do, we have that input line, that in line, and you've got comment code on the top. You can make your own starting file. So you could have comments on the top with your name. Down at the bottom, you have a blank input of some sort. Whatever that input is. Well, now I could save this, and I could call this my template file, for example. And now, every time I start a piece of code, I go grab that template file and then rename it to my new file name. That way I've got some of those things already in there. I can save myself time and a lot of effort by doing that. So now I have in that folder, now I have a template. So I want to start working. All right, I'm going to go edit it. And the first thing I'm going to do is go File, Save As, and call it Third Program. So that's how we flip between those two of those. So again, you have to work through this material in the book. If you start at 9 o'clock on Sunday and expect to be done, you are going to fail for a couple of reasons. Even if you have enough time, Some of this your brain will need time to digest. So start early in the week. Take some breaks. Walk away from it sometime. And if you don't give yourself time to do that, you're going to end up frustrated. When we get some longer programs and you have a simple syntax error and it's not working and you don't know why, and your brain has already pre-filled in a colon or some other symbol, if you don't have that time to walk away, you're probably going to be very frustrated and very saddened. All right, so I'm going to close these out because I got 147 of them open. So let's look at what's the assignment for this week. So this week and this week only, you are not going to turn in a .py file. Every week until the end of the semester, you are now going to be turning in .py files except this week. So you have 5 questions to answer. So your first assignment, what is the advantage? Blah, blah, blah. What are comments? Write and save a program that prints out your name and waits for the user to press the enter key before the program ends. Make sure the program runs. In this case, you are going to copy and paste it in along with your answers here. That is your assignment for this week. There is also the last quiz of the semester. So the next time you take any kind of a quiz will be the final in May. We do not have a midterm in this one. We do not have a midterm. So the next quiz will be your final. I will give you one of the questions right now for the final. Monty Python has some very successful people that were involved in it. One of them went on to become a physician. Which member of Monty Python became a physician? So the comedy troupe Monty Python, one of them became a physician. That is a question on your final, and I just gave you that answer.